Instead of buying an expensive trigger, I've been working on this trigger, polishing things up. Tonight we're going to put in a Power Custom aluminum trigger with an over travel screw. Shape of the trigger is supposed to give you a little bit more leverage. That should cut down on the sensed trigger pull. So what we're going to do first, though, is we're going to completely disassemble a spare trigger that I have, and so I can get to the parts that I've been working on and show you the difference that some polishing will make. Fire this trigger off. All right, we need to push out the trigger pin. That pin. That should release the hammer spring, the ejector, the hammer spring on that side, and the hammer. That's all we really want to get to now, just to show you an example. We have to pull these out of the other hammer just because, or the other trigger set, just because we need to get to pulling the trigger out itself as well. So what we're going to do here is we're going to just release this one spring, push that back a little bit. We're going to push this back in, and I'm going to use a little tape to try to keep all the pins in there. They can be a total pain to have to reassemble the entirety of the trigger. We're going to do our best to just keep these pins in place. All right, so for this one thing to notice is, I'm sure you can see this particular trigger. Actually, we'll show you after it's disassembled. Let's take out the hammer spring. So when the round fires, it comes up and hits the firing pin. The round pushes the, let's pop this out of the way here. It's in the way, get down there. There we go. The bolt pushes back on this. That's what recocks the hammer. This surface, which you can see is polished up on this kid bolt, and this surface looks pretty shiny, right? Well, let me show you. This is what that surface normally looks like. Fairly dingy gray. So I polished that up. Anything where parts touch and rub, I've begun polishing with some flits and these little tips you see behind you here. It's a couple minutes, everything's nice and smooth and shiny. All right, so what we need to do next, we need to take out this pin here that is holding in the hammer and its spring. I'm gonna put these next to each other now so you can see the difference. Not sure how well that shows up on camera. Silver gray. Down here, we're going to need to push out the pin that's holding the trigger mechanism in. Try to get that to stay where it is. This now should just lift right out. And then out came the trigger return spring and plunger. So now we need to switch these out. So what we're going to do is we'll take the sear, we'll put it in here, put the slave pin in, and what that does is just keeps everything in place while we're putting it back together. if we can get it to line up. There we go. Once we get the trigger in place, then this pin will just simply push out the other side, and everything will drop into place nicely. However, this doesn't seem to be going in the whole way. Hopefully that does not create a problem. Now what we need to do is pop out the pin that holds in the disconnector. And we're going to reassemble the disconnector here on top of the spring. And again, try to line up those tiny little holes with big fingers and get the parts in. Again. All right, let's try to trap that. And terrific, the little pin ran somewhere. Well, I guess till we find that one, we're going to harvest one out of here. And worry about that later. Okay. Let's try not to have this one go somewhere we can't find. I've done this several times already on other triggers, and I'm not sure why this one's being such a pain. It actually does not want to pass through that hole. The hole looks slightly elongated. Okay, let's tap it the whole way through once. And then let's go back here and tap it out. Okay. Could be just some of the anodizing on there. Creating a little bit of resistance. I think we're lined up now. Bingo. All right, so the slave pin is set. Hopefully that'll push out. Appears to be that it'll push out easy. So now what we need to do is drop this back into the trigger housing itself. Feels a little tighter than normal, and hopefully that's not a problem. So when we drop this in, we're going to line up this hole here with this hole and put the pin through. But first thing we need to do is ensure that we also get the trigger return spring and plunger in there ahead of time. We're going to drop this down into place. Sometimes this gets in the way. The bolt hold open can get in the way sometimes of trying to slip this down through. Actually, I think it's the pin. I think it's the slave pin. So you know what we're going to do? We're going to pop that out. And luckily, I do believe, hoping I do, otherwise our effort will be slightly challenged. I do believe I have one here, slave pin for over travel. All right, save everything. Put it in a little Ziploc bag. You never know when you're going to need it in the future. So what we're going to do is grab this. We're going to push this slave pin in, forcing that other one out. Just a little bit out of alignment. There we go. That's the whole way through. Now this should drop right back in here pretty good. Look at that. Now we're going to take, that pin goes across the top. This is our trigger pin. Make sure this stays back. And there we can just see that little slave pin through the hole there, almost. I know you guys can't there, you might get a picture of it. Let's push this in. Put this down into position here. Push that through. And the slave pin dropped out. Let's put this somewhere safe, like on a piece of painter's tape. And let's just give this a little tap. All right, we're in. Now what we'll do is we'll eventually adjust the over travel on that as well. But now we need to assemble the rest of the trigger before we start adjusting that. So we're going to take the hammer and the little dog leg spring. It's going to go right up here with the dog leg going down. Sure you can see how shiny that is, glistening in the light as compared to the gray one. Shiny is less friction. This goes under this little cross piece here, which is going to hold the other part of the spring down later. We want to get this in here where we can see, again, the hole on the hammer. We're going to take this pin as we get this lined up. Take a little pressure in multiple directions all at the same time. Come on, be good. There we go, I think. Yep, there we go, we're through. Now, this pin here that holds in your extractor or your ejector, actually, while this is open, we're going to replace this with a Powder River Precision ejector. These are the same thickness as the slot. I'm sure if you've taken these apart before, this thing's flopping all around. Well, check this out. Let's do this and see if we can keep it together while we're doing this. I'm going to do a couple things at once here. We're going to push this pin through just a little bit. I hope it doesn't fall out. Now we're going to pop off this extractor. We're going to pop into Powder River. And the cool thing is the back of the Powder River, see that little wire cut area? That's an extractor. So if you ever break your extractor when you're out shooting, you can just break that end off and replace the extractor in your on the side of your bolt. So we're going to pop this back in here like this, push that down in. Tolerance is nice and snug. It's not going to go anywhere once it's in there. Boom. It is secure. Now what we're going to do is we're going to push this other spring down below that pin, run it through. We're good. Only thing left to do really with this is to put in the hammer spring. And we're going to go ahead and do that now. Pull your trigger, the hammer comes forward. Hammer spring was also polished up, so was the channel that the hammer spring rides in. Any point that rubs over another point, I decided to just go ahead and polish. This goes in the little hole you can see here from the inside. Sometimes it might help to have a little needle nose pliers to get that seated down in there. Now, trigger cocked. So we already have done some pull testing on this, and when it started, the pull weight on this before we did any buffing on the metal was 4.5 pounds. 4 pounds, 5.8 ounces. After the buffing only, and I will admit this return spring is a 2.25 pound return spring from a Kidd. So it's got a 2.25 pound spring in there. Our testing so far has taken this from about 4.5 pounds to 2 pounds, 8 ounces, 2.5 pounds. So it took about 2 pounds off of it. It triggered anywhere from like just over 2 to 2.5, and averaged out to 2.5. We can take the safety off. We can see that actually it's just right there. I mean, get the safety off. There. Boom. Actually, it feels tighter than the other one. Not sure why that would be, unless it's the actual return spring is already pushing against the trigger. But let's see what we get here. We'll try to do some testing on this outside of the stock. We'll test it again later and just see what kind of pull we get on this. It feels tighter than before, and I'm not exactly sure why. It really shouldn't. Let's see what we get. .4, 3 pounds, 4 ounces. 2 pounds, 6 ounces. 2 pound, 2 ounces. 2 pound, 3. 2 pound, 5. 2 pound, 15. 1 pound 10, that's a little off. It's hard to do it when I'm trying to hold it still, keep the hammer from flying forward, and get a good read. 2 pound 1 ounce. I mean, we're no worse than we were before. Coming up on number 10, 2 pound 2.6. So roughly 2 pound 4.4 ounces. We'll see how accurate that is once we get this back in the gun. That's getting a barrel change on it shortly. But yeah, so this has the Power Custom trigger in with the over travel. It has the Powder River ejector pin in with the wire cut extractor hook already mounted in there. And that's it. The only modifications done so far to go from about 4.5 pounds to a little less than 2.5 pounds, 2 pounds 4 ounces. I will probably go ahead and change out this spring for one that's 1 3/4 pounds and see if that makes a difference. The closer we get to 2, the better I think it'll be, and we'll go from there. We can actually probably, this is a huge Allen wrench here. Almost like we need to drill a hole through the trigger guard to get in there. Might be beneficial in the future to do that, to run the Allen wrench the whole way through, or have one with a little ball on the end so you can actually get in there and turn that a little bit more productively. Oh, that's not too bad. I got it going now, I think. Let's see what we got here. Maybe just a couple more turns. Probably ought to throw some Loctite in there. Thing is, if you run this back too far, it won't go far enough to actually release the hammer. I think that's right on. I think it's right on. Try to get hold of this to break it, get it under some light here. Not really possible to do that. We put something white behind here. Yep, I'm going to leave it alone at that. I think it's right there. I think that's just right there. Yep, I'm going to put that 1 3/4 return spring in here. That'll take off just a little bit more resistance on the trigger. See what the reset looks like. Right there. No over travel. Short reset. No over travel. So you can zoom in on this a little bit. What do you think? I think we've got no over travel. Nope, I'm leaving that alone. That looks good to me. Only thing we will do is change out that return spring and lighten that up, and that's as good as we get. So you figure this is a standard Ruger trigger, polished with a Dremel tool and some of these little tips with some flits. Any part that moves against another piece has been polished. The only other addition to this, other than the ejector, is the Power Custom trigger with over travel. If you use their SEER and other mechanism, there is the ability to do some pre-travel adjustment in there. This really, for pre-travel,